Welcome to this episode of the Local Earth Discussion Series. We are grateful to be bringing you information about visionary solutions for the planet and regenerative community development. We are a nonprofit organization that operates primarily on contributions from our Patreon members and donations. If you appreciate the information shared in these discussions, please consider becoming a Local Earth Patreon member. A link to the membership information is shared in the description below. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Solar Energy Alliance. There is a link in the description below for a free solar proposal for your home and information about how to become a partner or ambassador with the Alliance. We now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the Local Earth Discussion Series. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Local Earth Discussion Series focused on visionary solutions with Raymond Powell. Welcome, Brother Raymond.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for all the work you're doing with this broadcast. Some great conversations have been happening. I'm really glad we're doing this.
Yeah. Do you prefer Raymond or Ray?
Either way. I grew up mostly as Ray. As I get older, it seems like more people adapt to Raymond.
Yeah.
Whatever feels good, it's great for me.
All right. Well, it's been a real honor and joy to get to know you over the last couple of years. First met you at Portal to New Earth, and just seeing you at different events and things, and just cross-pollinating. It's been a real joy to get to know you. And
yeah, likewise.
Thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thank you. Thanks for the work you're doing to bring out the work the others are doing, because, yeah, I love who you've had on so far.
Cool. Well, I'll share a little introduction to Raymond here, and then we will dive into the discussion. Ray started programming computers in 1980 at the age of 7, and by the age of 19 was hired as a professional software engineer. Since then, he has stayed on the cutting edge of industry trends, and he now applies that knowledge to co-create systems and blueprints that take on some of today's most complex social problems. Through the writing of code, as well as identifying and bringing together the most talented engineers and systems architects on the planet to synchronize their efforts, one of Ray's fundamental goals is to unify people through the creation of new standards of action and interaction that more closely align with the natural patterns inherent in the fabric of the universe. I love that line. Becoming an entrepreneur and obtaining success as a young man in parallel with awakening to the reality of a world filled with oppression, Ray set out to create true inner wealth beyond money. He has been a pioneer in truly defining sovereignty and revealing how from that place people can create environments of true synergistic co-creation. From capitalist to activist, Ray has been bringing awareness to what is really happening in the world since 2007. When Ray became a father, this pushed him even further along in the discovery of how to create profound changes in our political, social, ecological, and economic systems. Now half of his year is dedicated to being a dad to 3 beautiful star children and to building and organizing intentional community projects on the ground. And the other half is dedicated to sharing how digital technology can be used to remind us of the technology of loving kindness that is already embedded in our DNA. Beautiful. Love it.
Yeah, thanks for reading all that. It's always awkward to hear all that about myself, but it is true as well. It's been quite a journey, a unique journey in my life for sure.
Yeah, it's beautiful, that line where I said that, like, more closely aligns with the natural patterns inherent in the fabric of the universe. That's just that's so beautiful to connect.
Yeah, it's really
patterns.
Oh, what's that?
Just to connect with the natural patterns.
Absolutely. And I've been calling it biomimicry, but actually one of my favorite people now, Samantha Sweetwater, said biomimetics actually is a better word. So I like that. It feels deeper. Feels like we're rather than mimicking, we are actually tapping into the fundamental pattern, right? That may or may not mimic the way it looks in other expressions, right? So I think biomimetics is really what it's all about there, and it's about the fabric of the universe. Even if even if we can see certain patterns inherent in nature on Earth, those are certainly useful patterns to study and understand and mimic, right? But there's deeper. We are a unique species on Earth, and with a unique expression that's different than other life on Earth. So there's actually fundamental patterns that we can tap into on a more universal scale that I think are very relevant to living in harmoniously and thrivably on Earth for all life. So biomimetics. Yeah.
And I love that. Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of this, we're sitting here on planet Earth right now, and a lot of the conversations about, you know, thriving in harmony on this planet, but also taking in the greater context of consciousness of the unified field, the universe, the multiverse. I mean, it's vast.
Yeah. Yeah. And here we are finally in the era of disclosure. So we are finding out that there's probably some more to be dealing with than just the politics we see on the planet. Exopolitics is a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the word biomimicry, I have a friend who recently in this last year, we're part of a regenerative building alliance together, and he too has kind of shifted away from that of like, rather than saying we're mimicking biological systems or nature, like, because humans sometimes, I feel like we've separated thinking that we're not nature, and like we've evolved with nature, we are nature, and so like we're not mimicking necessarily something, we're part of it, and I guess just striving for the most healthy, thriving patterns.
For sure. Yeah, because if you mimic, you could mimic badly. If you actually, you fall into a groove of the actual pattern that underlies.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like, I mean, a cancer cell or something, that's natural. I mean, it's like, I mean, I guess you'd say like, but you could mimic something like a parasitic cell or a cancer cell or something we wouldn't want to be mimicking that.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly things to learn from every natural pattern we see.
Yeah. Well, how would you like to start this conversation? Any like direction you would like to take it in?
Yeah, well, I'm always about sharing the culmination of my life's work to this point, which is called Protocol.love. It is a digital protocol for scaling loving kindness. And it does so by tapping into what I think is the fundamental step towards moving to a world where loving kindness is at the forefront, which is vulnerable transparency. And that's something that we can consider on our interpersonal level, on our psycho-spiritual level, and of course in our personal relationships. And when you think about it, socioeconomics is just personal relationships scaled up to 7.5 billion people, right? So if we can identify loving kind behavior through vulnerable transparency at all these levels of interaction within ourselves and within our communities and within our global community, I think we're all going to be better off. I think it inherently creates an environment where we can achieve a much deeper level of collective intelligence and create systems that are much more in flow with natural patterns, and that ultimately create a thrivable world for all life. And as we get to this point of scaling with the number of people and the fact that for the first time in the last 20, 30 years or so, we've really achieved this global economy. So the whole world really is connected. Maybe there's some pockets of tribes left in the Amazon that haven't had contact. I hear that's true. But for the most part, every single human on this planet is now been drawn into this global system that we've created. And that is in itself a pretty natural phenomenon, I would say, to achieve the number of people on this planet and having had the desire to, with all the things to be worried about and scared of, to attempt to control what's happening with those 7.5 billion people. And it's been much the path we've been on for a long time, is realizing there's a lot to worry about. We need to get control of this. But in doing so, in trying to control each other, we've been doing the fundamental thing that is opposite of loving kindness, and that is the attempt to control. So there are ways, I think, to be in a communion with each other and with all life that allows for the full expression of each sovereign individual being, that still averts existential crisis, that still averts the things that there are to be worried about on a global scale without getting into control mechanisms. And it's relatively simple, actually, when you understand it, when you understand the proposal. That doesn't mean it's easy. And so it's gonna take some time, and definitely that's the work I'm doing now. So we're teaching this protocol. Primarily, my personal objective, being a tech guy, long before I'm any kind of community leader or people organizer or even space holder for conversation. That's really not my thing. It's a skill I've been learning for the last 10 or 15 years out of necessity, but it really isn't my natural gift. My most natural gift is more like abstracted view of patterns that are happening, and a kind of a deeper clarity to move with that data and with those patterns, to identify and see those patterns and raise consciousness, to help people raise their consciousness, which is literally, as I see it, the ability to understand greater complexity in the system, right? So basically my goal is to raise consciousness, and the best way I can see to do that is through technology systems. So a protocol specification is what I've designed, which answers what is it that we would want to know about a group of people doing something for the world. These group of people have come together, they're stewarding assets of some kind, almost always, right? They're stewarding a certain set of assets on behalf of the whole. No matter how we look at it, we can pretend there's such a thing as individual ownership. But really, when you dig into the conversation, you find that it's really temporal stewardship, no matter how you look at it. And really what people come together to do in groups is that they temporally steward assets on behalf of the greater whole. And so if that's the fundamental pattern that's happening, the more transparency into how, what, why they are stewarding those assets, the greater empowerment everybody has to have their voice expressed in the ways that the stewardship of those assets affect them. And that's really my goal, for every citizen of the planet to understand their place in the greater whole, to feel like a fully expressed sovereign being, and to recognize that every choice they make does affect the greater whole, and to have greater sense-making capacity into the ways that their choices affect the greater whole. That's really what Protocol.love is all about.
So I've seen that sometimes you'll play around with the word currency and actually use the word currency, like being able to see the flow of energy, what is happening. And like when you talked about for the first time, kind of in this current iteration of the human species, like the planet is, for the most part, interconnected at a global level, other than some, certain tribes maybe in parts of the world. And we have all of these different economic systems and currencies, whether it's the dollar bill or the euro, and now we're starting to, see those patterns of flow, and like, I guess seeing patterns, as you said, of like you're observing different patterns in the human species, on the planet, universal fabric, and how you see that the current currency like operating. If we have new platforms, and we've talked about this, such as like seeds or something being proposed onto the global stage, where with the technology of blockchain or holochain, like we're having the ability to have these new economic systems, these currencies that we really haven't had the opportunity to explore before. And so what's your kind of take and feelings on the current currencies?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell a little story about a brilliant group of people that came together about 15 years ago or so and started this conversation around the word currency. They were called the Meta Currency Project, and they still exist. They're at metacurrency.org. Yeah, they came up with that idea that what currency is about, what money is supposed to be about, is being able to scale interactions, right? Being able to have a means of exchange that allows us to have ledgers to record those exchanges that give us greater insight into what's happening in the greater economy. But what they realized eventually is that if you try to force every type of exchange through one bottleneck of a current of one specific metric, it is not nearly as powerful of an information system, right? So they said, what if we created a currency flow ecosystem where any individual or any community could identify the things they value in the world and create a currency, create a metric around the thing they value, and allow that metric to be recorded on ledgers and to scale up into many different ledgers and to ultimately be able to make intelligent decisions about the flow and of the exchange of that particular thing that people value in the world. We could look at that on its own and look so that each thing that is valued has its own pattern of exchange and flow, which seems to make a lot more sense than saying that there's only one pattern of exchange and flow for every single type of thing we need to be in exchange with each other about. That's not a natural pattern. And of course, there's an entrenched desire to keep the world using this singular means of exchange that is money, because it has become a centrally controlled mechanism at this point. And the people that have learned to play the game, which we could call game A, which is being really winning game A means being good at acquiring lots of money and getting bigger numbers at the bottom of balance sheets. There's many, many people who have gotten really good at this game. Many really intelligent, well-meaning people, in fact, have gotten really good at this game as well. It seems to me in the 46 years I've been on the planet that when you look at what's necessary to win the game, to win game A, where the goal is just to get the biggest numbers at the bottom of balance sheets or acquire the most money and power, is that to win that game, you have to become ever increasingly more sociopathic. Is like, to where you can recognize that the decisions you're making are affecting a lot of humans and other life negatively, but you win. So that's the game we're playing. We're playing the game for me to win. So if I'm winning, I'm playing the same game everybody else is playing, and we're all playing it together. And there's almost been this kind of like acceptance that this is proper and okay, that all the values we were taught as kids, to be nice to each other and to share your toys and all the lessons we learned in kindergarten, right? It really is a great book. We just ignore that stuff when we get into the workplace, when we get into our public service, whatever that may be, whether it's sweeping floors up after other people, or whether it's a high-level political affiliation of some kind. We're still in this game where we are serving to have our needs met in some exchange methodology that allows the better players or to people to win the game by being ever more horrible to each other, right? By being willing to do more and more things that are nasty and that are against everything we know that we got taught in kindergarten about how to be nice to each other. And so looking at it from that point of view really allowed me on my personal journey to step back and get out of the victim blame circumstance about the whole thing and realize that all we have to do is create a new game with different incentives. We can create a game that you win the game by making it a win for all life. That's how you win the game. We can just set up a different incentive structure. And so what I've discovered and what I've written about is it really isn't all that hard to play that game, in my opinion. I've written extensively about exactly how it can be done. And it does seem somewhat hard to implement within the structure of everybody else playing game A, right? And that leads me to some of the terms that I'll use are from Daniel Schmattenberger, Jordan Hall, and Forrest Landry, who you already mentioned, who seem to coin some of these terms in their discussions. But you have what they call the multipolar trap, right? Which is polar meaning multi-agents. So if we're all playing this game, we're playing, if we all wanted to come together and play a new game where we win the game by making sure everybody else wins too, by making sure everybody else playing the game has access to everything they need to thrive. So I become the best game player when the actions that I do and the contributions I make allow all other life to thrive. In that game, say we had 100 of us playing that game together on a desert island, and one day, one of us didn't play that game. And for instance, we cut down just enough of the trees on the island to build homes for ourselves, and nothing more, leaving plenty of trees and really not having great impact on the tree growth in general. But what if one day somebody came along and said, I'm going to build the giant kingdom, and I'm going to have lots of people, children, and build a huge community and a kingdom for myself, and I'm going to start getting all the trees now because I know I'm going to build this huge city. So I'm going to start chopping down as many trees as I can and preparing them for building. We are now, the rest of us are almost forced to do the same thing. We're almost forced to start cutting down the trees as fast as we can too, because otherwise he's going to get them all. That's what's called the multipolar trap. And so this is the thing. This is inherently rivalrous behavior when you look at it. It's inherently, rivalrous behavior is another term. Comes out of this circle.
I have a question, Professor.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, seeing, okay, one person maybe has decided not to play a game, like, oh, they're going to cut down all the trees to make this big castle, you know, that has 50 bedrooms. And, you know, that choice of like us going, oh, we got to do it too before all the trees are cut down. My question is like, why don't the other 99 of us be like, hey, let's have some communication and be like, you know, Johnny or Bob or Susie over there is like, something's going on, and like, we don't need to, like, you know, I mean, there's ways of addressing that, being like, hey, like, let's make sure we're addressing this. I guess that would be my thought of like the more evolved pattern to see. So how do we either play both those? Because it seems like we've gotten into a game where lots of people have kind of taken that route of like, let's chop down all the forests and mine all the gold and all the coal and all the oil and, you know, take, and lost our connection of the concepts of reciprocal relationship, being in right relation, making sure we're out giving back to the planet or any entity as much as we're taking. And so I guess too, like, we have to address, like, it seems like a lot of the world's playing game A. And so rather than continuing to do that and take things, how do we put a pause on all of the extraction happening? And then two, how do we create that like kind of environment of the social experiment of the 100 people on the island where we can start exploring game B and hopefully inspiring millions and billions of other people to see this other way of living? So kind of two questions there. Like, one, how to like address the current extraction that's happening, if that's needed, or if it's like to put our energy into, I mean, that's definitely needed. I honor the people who are stopping, you know, those things happening, but then how do we start to create the game B, and at what scale? Is it 100 of us on an island working with Dunbar's number? Is it trying to get a whole city working? I mean, what are your thoughts on those kind of questions?
Yeah, great questions. So Protocol.love is exactly the means by which we can get deeper insight into when somebody is acting rivalrously. That is, determining that they are going to grab a lot of resources at the expense of the ability for other people to have access to those resources ultimately, right? When we see that behavior happening, that is rivalrous behavior. And Protocol.love, by sharing the core operations and decisions of people and groups, and individuals, of course, right? We get to see when rivalrous behavior occurs. So I believe that with Protocol.love, we will easily be able to algorithmically identify rivalrous behavior. And when that happens, we can do exactly like you said, have a conversation about that. Because the last thing we want to do is then making that the bad guy.
Yeah.
When we see rivalrous behavior happening, the last thing we can do is say, you're wrong, we're right. Now we're being rivalrous and we're continuing the pattern. What you'll see, I think, consistently in the decision to embark in rivalrous behavior is just, as I defined it earlier, a lack of consciousness, right? Or a lower level consciousness. That is where higher level consciousness is the ability to see greater complexity in the patterns that we're involved in. And lower level consciousness is less ability to see complexity. So it could seem like a win to grab as many trees as you can, but if you look deeper, you understand that if everybody tried to grab as many trees as they can, we would have no trees, and nobody would have any trees, and nobody would have any houses to live in. So ultimately, it's a lose. So you go from what appeared to be a win, just by looking at a greater level of complexity in the patterns, to realizing that's a lose, even for me as an individual. If I try to grab all the trees to build myself an awesome house, I know that the house isn't going to last forever. Right? I know I'm going to need more trees. And if I can realize that there's not going to be more trees someday, I realize it's a lose. And so it becomes my self-interest now to not do that, simply by. So I think sometimes we make the mistake of asking people to not have self-interest, to not be selfish, to put your desires and expressions aside because the collective is there. And I think that's a pattern that's flawed as well. So finding that right balance, right, between realizing it is self-interest to think about the collective, right? It is in your self-interest to think about the greatest amount of complexity in the system, to raise your ability to see the complexities and the patterns you're part of, and make sure that it is truly a win for you long term. Yeah. And that's what Protocol.love can encourage us all to do.
Well, and if that self-interest, to me, like what comes through is if a person has a perspective on life and existence that, like, that self-interest, the longevity of either themselves, of needing another house at some point in their lifetime, or caring for their children or grandchildren of the next generations. And I think a lot of indigenous cultures, have the 7-generation philosophy of making sure that I'm acting in a way that it's not going to harm the 7 generations down the road. And so I feel like anybody who's living in that ethos and believes in that, view of existence in the earth, then we could bring sense to be like, hey, if one person or a group is hoarding all the trees, all the resources, it's not, your children or your grandchildren might not have any resources to, either breathe air or build houses. And I think that could click in them of like, okay, like we could come to a harmonious, like, agreement that, like, let's be more mindful of how we're using these resources. And my concern is there might be some people on the planet that really don't at this point have much concern for the next generations. Like, I think there are some people that are just like, I just want to have a mansion and a yacht, or a bunch of mansions. Like, I just want to party. I don't care about the next generations. And I don't think that's the majority of the population, but I also, like, I feel like there might be some people who that is their, like, viewpoint of the world. And it'd be interesting how we meet those conversations as well.
Right. I find that actually a lot of those people you're referring to have children too.
Yeah.
And they want the best for their children.
Yeah.
So it's obviously a higher level consciousness thought to consider 7 generations for all life, or the length of 7 human generations for all life, for that.
For all life, not just humans, the 4-leggeds, the winged ones, all life. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think there's also a desire, of course, especially a masculine desire. And when I say masculine, I don't mean men, although men tend to embody masculine traits, right? But I'm talking about a masculine archetype, which is in all of us to look out for our DNA more than the rest. And so I think a lot of the winners of Game A, like that we could call something like the elite on the planet, generational winners especially, have come to see themselves as actually fairly environmentalists, as caring greatly for the earth, as caring greatly a lot for all life. What they've had to do, though, the interesting paradox of what they've had to do to achieve that level of thought is to separate themselves as humans from most other humans, to say that we care about all life except for these other humans, because they apparently don't care about all other life because of the ways they act. And of course, the ways they act are very much influenced by what these elite do, or what these winners of Game A do. And so that like when they manufacture the next cheapest like chemical crap that can be passed off as food and put it in the grocery stores, and people buy it off the shelves and eat it, that confirms to themselves that they must be a different species. Why would they eat that? Yet they're the shareholders behind a lot of the structures, the big corporate government structures that allow this to happen, right? That even create the food, these kind of, like, for instance, of the food, that even put this food on the shelves. But yet their disdain is more for the people who are stupid enough to buy it, rather than for their responsibility. Why did I put it there to begin with? And so there's this class separation. I really think that's kind of the crux of what we're dealing with in this coronavirus thing, is that we are getting to face the shadow inside of all of us that holds a little bit of room in our being for this class of what we all would consider to be useless eaters, that don't take care of themselves, don't take care of their community, don't take care of society, don't care, and we don't need them here. Like, there's this idea, we all hold space, and some of us just more than others. I think this elite class of Game A winners tends to see a vast majority of the human population as useless eaters, and that tends to draw some judgment if you don't realize, if you're not willing to look inside yourself and look for the part of you that is also willing to see a certain class of people as useless eaters. And I think we're really struggling with that right now, right? We're really struggling with coming to the consciousness that we all have it within us to consider people useless eaters, to be what other people consider useless eaters, right? And to choose how we want to play in that environment. And that's what's come forth to me through a lot of processing with this coronavirus stuff. It might not seem readily apparent how I got there, but I hope to some people it does. I think it's a really important conversation we're having. It's about how to scale systems at a global level. We need to be aware of our tendency to be able to put people into the category of useless eaters.
Well, you've mentioned scale several times, and that's something that I focused on a lot over the last couple of years of regenerative community development, and really looking at Dunbar's number and designing community systems around that 150 number, and then where that scales into like a bigger city, a country, a planet. And, looking at natural patterns, and just on this planet, regardless of the universe, like we don't know what happens necessarily on Mars or different star systems, but like here we can watch an ecosystem, and if there get to be too many, rabbits in a meadow, there's going to be more coyotes come in and balance out the population of rabbits. And the human species, our exponential population growth in the last 100, 200 years, like for a long time we were pretty steady, and then with technology, industrial evolution, industrial agriculture, like we've spiked, and we're on a finite planet, finite resources, exponential species growth. And so something is going to balance that. That nature will balance itself out. And so I think right now we're kind of being given the opportunity to look at these questions of my hope is that like we as a conscious species would like have the dialogue, the loving dialogue of like, hey, let's be mindful of of the population growth of our species and figure out ways that feel healthy and educated for all of us to like approach that in a conscious way. And
Yeah.
if we don't do that, like whether it's plagues, whether it's natural disasters, whatever, like something's going to balance out the system. And
Absolutely.
so, I mean, we're at an interesting point to observe these questions.
Right. Well, what is missing? I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. And what is missing in our capability to do that is the raising of consciousness in kind of like, since we have this class separation that is real, it exists on this planet. We have a very clear separation of multiple different classes that you could find a million different ways if you want. But the bottom line is certain people have access to more information and resources, and better information and resources than a lot of other people. And so if we want to raise consciousness as a whole, and we want everybody to start thinking more consciously about how they affect everything, we have to give people the time and space to come to a certain realization about that. Normally I think when like in a more simple culture before all the technology, I think just getting up and doing the things you need to do literally to survive each day, which is going out and getting food and building your shelter and maintaining your shelter and in a tribal sense, we are very connected to the activities of the expenditures of our energy and how they relate directly back to our survival. In this complex society, we've totally lost that. And we have the capability of people to actually survive. We have the capability for people to actually survive without any actual connection to how their energy expenditures relate to their survival, right? In a true natural way. And so it completely disconnects us, right, from everything. And so definitely, education, school system, we're going to be in education. I personally don't even like the word education, right? I like it to be our duty to provide access to information, and for people to be on a journey of self-discovery and have access to the information, to find the information that resonates with them. But if we are going to create systems, we are going to be responsible for the next generation coming up and what information they have access to. We definitely need to get them reconnected to nature. We definitely need to get connected with the energy expenditures we're doing and how that relates to our actual health and survival as individuals, and ultimately as communities, and ultimately as a global community. And in doing so, also helping people realize their power, their true, intrinsic, sovereign, divine power to be expressed in any way, and that they are a clean channel for God, for the universe expressing itself through evolution. They are a channel for that expression. Every single one of us, every single being, every single life form that we see is an expression of evolution and a divine expression of universal love. And a reminder of that would really come in handy, I think, in our educational system. And really this, more than any specific information, right? And I think that's the paradox we've got ourselves into, is thinking that if we teach people information, that they'll somehow magically on their own come to some higher consciousness. Now, for some of us, that's totally possible, to be fed through an information system that leads us through some way to a realization of a higher consciousness, a higher understanding of the complexity of the patterns we're involved in. But for many, it doesn't. It just makes them like obedient workers, to follow orders, to do what they're told to do, to accept information as fact because the authority told them that's fact. And that pattern is proving not to work. That pattern is proving that it's going to come to an end soon. And things like coronavirus really point that out, because we have this information complex. We have this information flow that we don't have the sense-making capacity to actually bring everybody on board with what's happening and what we can do about it that's a win for all. We don't have that sense-making capacity, but yet we are a global species that, with the press of a red button, can destroy this entire planet and most of the life on it. And we don't have a sense-making capacity. So as we raise the next generation, sovereignty and freedom is the core of where it starts, right? And this is where I think this is one of the places where Protocol.love really explains or provides a mechanism to scale in a way that's different than a lot of the other mechanisms that people present for scaling good things in the world. And because it taps into the individual sovereignty first. It attaches to the realization of individual power and sovereignty is the first step in even being capable of stepping into your community in a meaningful way and being in unity with other life. Knowing that you have the capacity to destroy, you have the capacity to love, you have the capacity to do all these things within you, and you have the freedom to choose. And from that freedom, you're coming to the own realization via your own path, that by raising your own consciousness and looking at the ways that you can create a win for all other beings around you, that's the win. That's the win for you personally. And I think the only way to realize that lesson is through personal sovereignty and freedom. And I think that gets missed in a lot of the conversations we have around being more ecologically friendly or even social safety nets. We get caught in this trap of wanting to give people a handout rather than a hand up, right? People need help. We're here to help each other, but do so that's in a personally empowering way. Because through that journey of personal empowerment is when we realize our power to be of service to all of their life. And you mentioned Dunbar's number in there, and so I think this can work well. We've seen that, like I spoke to this pattern working well in tribal cultures, in small tribes. And it's Dunbar's number talks about basically how when you scale a tribe up to about 120 or 150, it still kind of works. It still works for the most part. And that's because we have the capacity to manage and understand a relationship with about 120 or 150 people. We can recognize who they are, what their gifts are, how they're contributing to the tribe, and how we feel about how we're contributing to the tribe, and whether we want to play with them or work with them or anything else with them or not. And that can all work well. When we get beyond that, we start relying on the telephone game, essentially, to tell us information about other people. That is rumor and innuendo and marketing and politics and campaigns and all of these things that are not direct human interaction. We are designed to be an empathetic, empathic connection with each other. We are very much designed to do that. It seems obvious. Whenever you can get into a group and you can sync up, everybody's experienced it, at least some in their life, and you can experience just a binding energy in the room where people are on the same page and everybody is in sync and things are just working. But I think we may have also experienced that that's the rare exception. Most of the time, that's not how we are. And in order to keep that, to keep that presence, definitely takes some practices and other ways of being.
Something that comes up is like these old devices we have of like a tribe of working at that Dunbar's number, 120, 150 people. There's a level of accountability within the village and the tribe. If, you did something really harmful to the crop that feeds the whole community, you're going to have accountability for that. People are going to be like, and not out of, again, not making anybody wrong or blame, but like there's accountability of like something really wrong what happened with the farm this morning, and when you get into a city of 2 million people, you don't even know who your farmer is, who's producing food. You're disconnected from really the source of anything. So if somebody's doing something without values and ethics or, morals that are in alignment with the tribe, you don't really know. And there's not that level of accountability. And then when you're also talking about the level of being able to, more, what was the word you used? When we can connect when we're all on the same field, communicating. What did you say? Telepathy. Yeah.
Well, I said empathic. Yeah.
Empathic. Okay. Like, there's talk of a lot of indigenous cultures that like, they don't even talk about game A, game B. They don't have the they don't practice any games of competition where like one person wins the race and is the champion. Like their games are like where everybody wins together. Hey, how can we create this to all reach the top of the tree, or, you know, something. And they don't have this competition built into their tribe, their culture. And it's, you know, it's research that they can maintain that telepathic communication because there's not barriers of like deceit of like, I'm going to try to cut down all the trees for my house or this or that. They're so synced up that that level of communication is there. And I'm starting to think like now, like we don't, very many of us connect with our neighborhood of 150 people. We're not really in that village tribe anymore. We don't even know our neighbors a lot of time. And we're connecting with, you know, thousands of people on social media or with these devices that maybe, I mean, if we can start coming back to building true resonance and harmony and vibration with like the neighborhood villages, the tribes, our like our smaller scale of community, then we can be syncing up and communicating more, I mean, at a deeper, more advanced and sophisticated level than I think than even these things can provide, you know?
Right, absolutely. Well, I think those things can be a tool to getting us there, because what we have right now is, for instance, especially in the United States of America, we've kind of our melting pot of all these different cultures coming together. So we don't have a cultural norm in the US nearly as much as there are such norms in other countries that were like in Europe. They fought long and hard for hundreds and thousands of years to draw lines around cultural norms. So the cultural norm of this region is clearly different than the cultural norm of this region, and we can just accept that. And if we can agree to stop fighting about it, it works. So they were able to kind of accomplish that, I think, in some ways. You know, forgive my limited historical background here, but in the U.S. we have, you know, I've read articles that are very convincing. We have at least 5 distinct cultures, all kind of mixed up, largely around cities versus rural areas is the major cultural difference. So we're all embedded. There's no clear lines of separation, right? The real cultural differences are between cities and rural areas in the U.S. And then the various regions of those are even different within themselves. So we have a complex situation, and we have a very embedded habits of life here that we have to overcome. So the theory behind Protocol.love is to give us digital tools to help us scale Dunbar's number, to make it bigger, so we can be in more complex relationship with more people and have a greater understanding of the way our choices are affecting the greater whole. And at the same time, realizing that at the end of it all, we actually don't need digital technology to help us do that at all. How's our connection? We actually don't need digital technology to help us do that, right? We are perfectly capable of returning to cultural norms within groups of 100 or 150 people. And if we find ourselves not in resonance with the norm we're used to, we have the opportunity to join any number of 1 million different groups that are more in resonance with our natural way of being. But we can't just get there tomorrow. We can't just be there tomorrow. Because when we're in that, we won't need the digital tools anymore. But in order to help us remember that we have the capability to exist in tribe like that together, and I'm not saying for sure that I'm convinced that this is exactly how it's going to play out, that we will in fact end up in little communities of 100, 150 people, right? But it very well may go that way. And maybe that is a really healthy pattern for humanity to scale. Protocol.love just helps us test that by getting actual feedback, by getting actual data on what's working and what's not, because we share transparently into the field what activity is actually happening, right? And then we do analytics on those activities like we've been doing. The economic analysts step in, and the number crunching geeks step in. We come up with all kinds of amazing information about what's happening when you scale everything together. But yeah, you know, I think it was the Iroquois tribe in the Americas that had large nation of millions of people, covering like a third of the U.S. I hope I'm pretty close on these numbers. And they had a large distributed governance structure. that recognized the sovereignty of each individual and each tribe, but yet they agreed to come together in treaty around things that were important to all of them. And that's kind of how the United States Constitution was written. They took a lot from that way of governance, and a lot of it was written into the Constitution. But of course, when it was heavily embedded, when they were going for a more game B approach, at least they thought they were at the time, they thought they were going for a more game B approach that recognized individual rights, that enabled society to evolve more naturally with less control structures that were unnatural, right? At least I sense that that's what some of the intents were of the founders. Even though they wrote a lot of that in, they were still embedded in this Constitution of the United States was still embedded in this greater game A, which had been already playing out for hundreds and thousands of years. So to where, the Bank of England managed to keep its tentacles into the U.S. The king realized at some point, it's no point in going to war. We already won. We already made all the states, all the colonies go into debt to the Bank of England. So we already won the war. We don't need to fight it out physically anymore. Things like that.
That's a system design of a fractional reserve debt-based banking system. So that right there is observing patterns of who created systems. And seeing the energetic flow of that. And that's to have that discerning eye of what creates value or currency in a system. People who've taken it upon themselves to learn about what a fractional reserve-based banking system is, what a debt-based, how the Federal Reserve operates, how value is created, how that's related to gold in some mysterious way, which is a total interesting little rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah.
And so you've mentioned a couple things of governance models, decentralized governance models. One thing I wanted to reference real quick was that thought of the rural and the urban. And my background is in architecture, and we spent a lot of time in community design and focused on regenerative community development. And I think that Dunbar's number of how many people we can know and work with in our neighborhood, village, our tribe, can be applied and tested at both rural and urban design methodologies. So just looking at those basic needs of food, water, shelter, waste management, energy, every neighborhood village in a city, you can break it down to how densely that's designed for how those 150 people are, that all of they're working at that 150 person scale to have their community garden or their community farm, their rainwater catchment systems, maybe the solar array or the renewable energy system for that neighborhood of 150 is designed at that scale for 150 rather than trying to serve 2 million people's energy at once for a city. And so there's more condensed versions of a community model, and then there's more rural that aren't as dense in population. And so I think we start to test out where Dunbar's number fits into a small little rural village of 150 people, maybe a smaller little township of 1,000 or 2,000 people, up to urban planning methodologies for cities of millions. My personal opinion is observing, I don't necessarily go with that, creating super dense high rise, that doesn't intuitively feel to me like the solution, but I support those that are exploring those urban model concepts.
Yeah. I agree.
But the decentralized governance model of, whether it's different First Nations tribes and how they operated, and now with things with the technology that we have, the blockchain, holochain, the technology of creating, and that's where I've been really fascinated watching seeds and their evolution, as they have to me, a really beautiful exploration of governance, digital governance, where each citizen has the opportunity to have their say in what's going to create value in the economic system of seeds, and playing with this technology of an individual sovereign citizen rather than necessarily a representative democracy. And there's a part in there where you can allocate somebody to make a decision for you. You can give from your free will, you can have somebody represent you in the vote of something. But I think that's where I'd love to hear some of your feedback on your work with holochain, where that's at in its evolution, and accessibility to the world, blockchain. Yeah, like what kind of some of your thoughts on those things?
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, regarding the rural versus more metro, urban designs. If we did have the capacity to do that study, which I'm encouraging us to have, and which Protocol totally supports us to have the capacity to put people to have people form into groups of 100, 150, or whatever, and feel fully empowered in decision making within those groups. I think what we'd find at the end of the day is there's significant cultural differences that would occur in the behaviors of the people that are in the urban areas versus the people that are in the more rural areas, right? I think significant differences in cultural norms would appear naturally. And I think that's some of the tension we're working with, especially around this coronavirus thing. If you're living in a very, very dense populated area, the cultural norm is going to be like, it is our duty to stay inside and isolate, to make sure we are not inadvertently spreading a virus. If you are in a much less dense populated area, that's not going to be nearly as powerful of a draw for that to be the cultural norm. And this, we're seeing that play out right in front of us at this time during the recording of this interview. A real schism between people really judging each other for their cultural differences in that way, which is simply an expression of what works in their community to a large extent, right? So to allow those differences to occur, but still maintain a healthy interoperability, a working togetherness. Like we talked about competition earlier briefly. I'm going to get to answering your question for sure. Mm-hmm. But competition, in my world, I really think competition is great. If we are competing to make life as awesome as possible for all beings, like it's a perfectly healthy competition to engage in that. Because if you're if you're not the best one, if you don't win that competition, you still win.
Yeah.
Right. So everybody's still happy. Yeah. Competition goes awry when it becomes rivalrous. When I want to win over another party or another being, I want to have power over. Competition takes a really scary turn into rivalrous and destructive behavior that doesn't scale. It doesn't scale well, and ultimately leads to a de-evolution into chaos and violence. So, but yeah. So that being said, Seeds is a great new currency model. And Reiki, who you've had on the program here, is an awesome dude. We've spent a bunch of time hanging out and talking and about all this stuff. And his approach is great. He is really bringing a lot of brilliant, well-meaning, great-hearted people around to build this project. And I'm a super fan. And for my personal taste, it's slightly more top down than I'd like it, than it works for my personal taste. Maybe just because I come from a more cultural norm that's more like sparse population, where we don't need as much agreement on as many things all the time, and where we can agree on some, so maybe just exploring that a little bit in the context of that. But I think it's great work, and it's an important project, and anybody who's feeling called to it, I say yes, get involved, become part of that, become part of Seeds, get a wallet. And I want anybody else who doesn't feel as called to participate in that, but you kind of want to be your own Seeds. You want to create your own currency that's completely interoperable with Seeds and completely interoperable with all the other currencies that are coming forth. That's where Protocol.love and the Facilitators Guild of Protocol.love will be able to support you in rising to your leadership capacity in that. So now there's some technical aspects to a little bit of centralization that's happening there too as well, and where we can get into holochain. When I started thinking about, long before it was called Protocol.love, even long before it was called CoGov, which is Collaborative Governance Technologies, which is cogov.tech being the site where you can learn about all this stuff. Before it was called either of those things, I was exploring some of these ideas about from personal sovereign power, how do we come into unity together and do wonderful things together? And when Ethereum came around, I was super excited about the ability to write these smart contracts that were independent and uncontrollable by any other entity. No government could come in, no big corporation or big central bank could come in. and thwart the operations of the smart contract, at least in theory. And this was very attractive. I was super excited. So I started launching my first Ethereum smart contracts. Of course, it took me like over a month to download and run a full Ethereum node, because not only did I have to download the whole entire transaction ledger up to that point, but I had to execute every smart contract process on my CPU and hard drive while I'm building that ledger. So it's a very complicated process. Every node on that network has to do all the same work, repeated. So it's a huge waste of energy ultimately. And what happens though, through the algorithms, it's called Nakamoto Consensus. It was what was written by somebody by the pen name of Satoshi Nakamoto in the original Bitcoin curve. Nakamoto Consensus is what operates Bitcoin, it's what operates Ethereum and many of the other major blockchains. While it has the theory of being completely decentralized and uncontrollable, it actually does centralize. It centralizes around the miners. The miners have the capacity to control the network. And in fact, if 3 of the largest mining networks right now on Bitcoin merged, they would in fact control the network. They would in fact be able to create whatever transactions on that Bitcoin ledger for some period of time. And so, in other words, the capacity to re-centralize is inherent. The capacity to become, now, in theory, it should always be far less centralized than the level of centralization we see in the current game-made paradigm, right? If we look at the 80-20 rule as kind of the fundamental pattern of the world, and we can accept the fact that maybe something like 20% of the people will probably generally be leaders for the other 80%, I think that's a healthy pattern that could work. What we have here is skewed so far out of that, where really we have 0.00001% or something ridiculous being not leaders, not even good leaders, but like bosses over the rest of the population of humanity in many, many ways. So I don't think that's anywhere close to a healthy pattern. Blockchain allows us to decentralize somewhat closer to a healthy pattern. We'll see. We'll continue to see how that plays out. But my true deep core belief is that a truer, beyond decentralization is necessary to completely distributed network of information and resource sharing. That is what the internet was designed to be. The internet completely, as soon as it became that thing in the early 2000s, it started moving away from that thing and it started moving into centralized structures again. Because we are designing, companies came to be on the internet, the Googles and the Amazons back in the early days, and the Microsofts, and actually Microsoft almost missed the boat. But a big of these, some of these big corporations operating under game A business models started having to build data walls around what was a completely independent distributed network of information. They started building data walls because the need for high speed indexing and data capacity forced us into things like data servers. Data servers, you can only run so many of them in replication before it becomes impossible. So they had to build data walls and data server farms to house database data for quick indexing and retrieval and all these things. And in order to follow the same game A patterns of getting the capital investment, they had to borrow money. They had to create new money, which is borrowing money, which is creating debt, in order to fund all these things. Now they had to create a business model to pay back that debt. And the business model they went to was the standby that has been prevalent in TV and radio and newspapers forever, which is advertising. And so we've tapped back into the same fundamental centralizing patterns on the internet and the ultimate profit patterns of game A that force it to be that way. So Holochain comes along and it actually tears down those patterns. Holochain creates an environment where those patterns cannot actually function. And it does that very simply by using a protocol that's been in use heavily on the internet for a solid 20 years. It's called the Bittorrent Protocol. This is the protocol, for people who don't know, that has enabled those kids, whoever they are, to go out there and get books, movies, software, music for free on the internet. They can just download it all. How do they do that? They do it through Bittorrent a lot of times. Bittorrent works and cannot be shut down. We know that the FBI, we get those FBI warnings, and we know that there's a lot of money spent on ending piracy of things. They have not been able to stop it with Bittorrent. It cannot be stopped. The reason is because the data is everywhere and nowhere all at once. Every node has some view of the data, and it shares much of that view in common with many of the other nodes, but not every node has 100%. And this is a natural pattern. This is the way nature works. In Einsteinian reality, there's not one single being that has the 100% similar view of the universe, view of reality. All of our views of reality is 100% different than every other one of us views of reality. However, there's enough similarities in our views where we can build consensus, do all kinds of amazing things together. So by following these biomimetic patterns, right, we look for the patterns that are inherent in the fabric of the universe itself. And if we're going to build digital technology to help us scale our human behavior, then let's look at the patterns that work in nature and use those. And that's what Holochain has done. That's what it's done from the onset. And it's a completely different design pattern than Bitcoin. The fact that it has come into fruition or existence anywhere around the same time as Bitcoin is fairly coincidental, I'd say. You know, it's like, it's a completely different technology, has far more, that is completely fundamentally different than anything in common. And it does so by following, mimicking nature, patterns in nature, but accomplishing the same goals of fully distributing and fully empowering each node, which is the same, which is a different level of abstraction of saying what's important to me in the world, and fully empowering each individual being.
Well, what you just shared, there's all kinds of little synapses firing in different parts of my being. For one, on this planet, I'm thinking like I see like mycelium sharing information through a forest, and I see different forms of the internet, technology, blockchain, holochain, like sharing information in different ways. How those synapses connect, different nodes, channels for communication, and I'm thinking of that like super earth grounded, you know, earth based, and then I'm thinking almost of like more cosmic consciousness and intelligence, of more universal concepts of how, you know, maybe different star systems are sharing information with one another. And so when we look at these biomimetics and patterns, are we looking down beneath our feet to the mycelium, as above so below? Like, are we, you know, looking up to, I mean, the consciousness and information patterns of a larger scale universal pattern? And I think those are interesting kind of paradigms. And looking at you know, me not being a tech person, of looking at, like, you know, the movie The Matrix, looking at ones and zeros, where we can dissolve into, I mean, this unified field of consciousness and information, that you have that like expertise in the coding background of like how holochain works, how blockchain works, just kind of just voicing that pattern of looking at like earth-based natural systems, ecosystems, forests, mycelium, star knowledge, you know, that a lot of indigenous cultures carry that wisdom. And so here we are in this complex multiverse, trying to make sense even between two of us.
Right.
And, you know, I guess one question for you, being a tech person, like connected with like the awareness of like holochain and its evolution, and when the world might have access to these tools, I've been watching really with this situation with coronavirus, seeing certain like YouTube videos getting taken down. Like I just saw something about like 2 doctors here in California that were having a conversation about the science of what they were seeing, about the results and the statistics that were being shared, and that they really didn't necessarily feel alignment with what was totally being shared out there to the public. And it got like 3 million views or something on YouTube really quick. YouTube took it down and, you know, said that it violated policies, that they don't support anything that's like disregarding like the World Health Organization's authority, that they feel that's out of their community guidelines. And then there's also a lot of people that have very a lot of questions around what individuals Bill Gates are influencing the World Health Organization, you know. And so if YouTube and Facebook are definitely censoring the information, then we are back to like when you said you rather than education systems of just allowing access to information and people being able to, you know,
Right.
seek out what they want.
Right. It seems like Bill Gates and the WHO and the media and Facebook and YouTube have become our educators now. Right. Right.
And so
we've seen the limit. We've seen the limit essentially. And I want to, this is quick. We've seen the limits to attempts to control evolution of life. And all of these things are attempts to control it. We have to control it. We have to control it centrally. These people that feel that way are tightening their grip. And we've seen throughout, it's a fully natural pattern. The more you tighten the grip, the more is going to slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
So they're not accomplishing what they want.
Yeah. Well, so how, like, from a technology standpoint and like holochain, and like I've asked you this, of a lot of people like wanting to migrate off of like Facebook Messenger chats and what platforms we start to go to. And I noticed recently a lot of the groups that I've been involved with, collaborative groups, have gone to Telegram as a messenger thread. And so I'm learning how Telegram operates. And but so I've had one question come to mind, and I'll go back to then like the holochain, where that is coming or what our alternatives are. But I've been all of a sudden with Telegram going like, okay, it doesn't have advertising like Facebook and all of that, but then like how is it created? How is it sustaining itself? How is it making money? So what are our alternatives that, I mean, are they ready right now? Are they coming soon? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, first, philosophically, when you get into, when you're in a rivalrous game A environment, privacy becomes very important because you have access to information. You need that information. You're not going to share that information because it gives you competitive rivalrous advantage over the other players in the game. So that's the whole basis of privacy, really, in my theory. Vulnerable transparency is really the ability to release and honestly be vulnerable, right, in an environment where people might be trying to take advantage of you. So when we talk about privacy in the context of game A, it becomes, there is no such thing as privacy, is what we need to realize on the internet. And anybody who's looked at Vault 7, the release from WikiLeaks a few years ago, there is no such thing. There's been hooks and hacks built into almost every device and every major operating system to be able to monitor the activities on those. And so when you talk about privacy in the sense of chat systems, instant messaging, and when you do that inside the business model of game A and how do things get paid for, anything that claims to have higher privacy is just as likely a honeypot for the CIA as it is anything that's more private. And so, I mean, to believe for a second that because some platform comes and said, we're private, that they are, is the height of like silliness to me. What is the problem with the problem that we're seeing in this, and the problem of people wanting privacy is an attempt to want to, like, and if our intentions are good, to create a better way of life on Earth, right? We understand that we need to do that, and we need to be able to have these there's a tendency to want to have privacy to this conversation, so the game A people don't know what we're up to, or something. But that's inherently rivalrous. That puts us right back to where we started. So the tension around this issue relates to the fact that it is not equal access to information. It's not about privacy. It's about the differentials in the access to the information. The hackers, the CIA, the NSA, certain government players, people with high security, they have access to all kinds of information. Google, the people who have higher level clearance at Google, that have access to raw database tables, and Microsoft and Yahoo and all the big companies. I didn't even name the big Instagram and I'm not even naming all the big ones, but they have access to, they have a differential in access to information. So that's the thing that's bugging us. It's not that I think, this is my theory, I don't think we actually want privacy. What we want is that if I'm going to be vulnerable, transparent, I want other people vulnerably transparent too. I want to know what you know about me. I want to know everything about you, and let's just operate together in that environment, right? But when we have this differential where only certain people get to know things about other people, that creates a tension. That creates a game A rivalrous environment where the person with access to more information can win the game. So it has to start somewhere, Josh. Some of us have to say, you know what? I am willing to sacrifice my own safety to live in vulnerable transparency. I'm willing to realize that I can come in and be destroyed tomorrow, but that if I do so, and with a pure heart and pure intention, that I will actually be more powerful in my death. Like, it really does require a certain aspect of that to be in people's being, and I am fully embodied in that. I don't want to be a martyr. The attempt to try to be a martyr is inherently non-martyrous, right? It is not martyrdom to try to be a martyr. It's a martyr to be coming from a place of true pure heart and find yourself destroyed over it. And I'm willing to do that. And I know not everybody is, but some of us has to start. Some of us has to start somewhere in embodying vulnerable transparency and allowing ourselves to be put in that position to show a new way of doing things. And if we can show that we can thrive, even if it's just for a moment in time before it's destroyed, I have all the faith that we won't be destroyed, of course. But the risk, I understand the risk tolerance isn't there for everybody, Yeah. But for those who it is, and for those who are willing to try, and those do have a purity of heart and want to be held to having a pure heart in all their actions, vulnerable transparency might be for you. And I'd love to talk to you.
Love to play.
Yeah, definitely.
So I loved what you're just sharing about, it's got to start with someone. It's got to start with a group who are being willing to operate on that level of vulnerable transparency. And that's a powerful thing you said of knowing that you could be destroyed that next day, and but then I believe I agree with you, and letting go of that ego, and okay, none of us are perfect. We're gonna be vulnerable. We're gonna share the things that we're not proud of, or just be okay, I'm a human being, we've all got our humanness. And then being able to start from that place of letting go of such the individual ego and being okay, now I can operate from an energetic place of kind of being torn down to, kind of almost nothing in a beautiful way, of just being able to operate from a place of okay, here I am in my humility, and I just want to try to be friends with you and work with you, and what's
vulnerable transparency will lead to an ego death of sorts, which leads to the willingness for more vulnerable transparency, which leads to more ego death, which leads it's a pattern. It's just taking the step to start you on the path. I've gone far my life circumstances had me take these steps without knowing I'm doing this virtuous thing of vulnerable transparency, but it did put me in positions where I found myself having to have an ego death and having to be in full vulnerable transparency is the only way to cope with the circumstances. And that was the most freeing experience of my life. And I would love everybody to experience that. And I know most people won't, but at least in the way I had to experience. So we can take steps, though. We can take steps towards getting there.
So what are some potential paths that we could, and I guess I use the word we as in, in the smallest scale, you and I, we as anybody listening to this discussion, which could be hundreds or maybe hopefully thousands of people listen to it, start, exploring, setting up the environment and the scenarios for game B. And that this, with my background involvement right now with Local Earth and the nonprofit that we've been focusing on, sustainable community development, regenerative community development, eco-village development. And I've really been working around that scale of coming up with a model around Dunbar's number of 150 people. And so that's where I personally am interested to start exploring the game B is how do we start to gather, and it might not be 150 people at first. It might only be 3 people or 4 people that have resonance around a concept.
Yeah.
And so that would be, I guess, I'm more going to ask you a question. That would be my, my personal ability to like try to step into this exploration of creating communities, sustainable communities around that scale, that within the DNA could be scaled up to be more of a part of a plan of an urban planning philosophy for a city, but more starting with just with that more urban village.
Right.
And so that's, one way path that I'm pursuing. What about, like, what do you think is the most practical for you in your life right now? How we might be able to play together, how to start, setting up scenarios to play with game B.
Right. Well, in theory, Protocol.love built on Holochain is infinitely scalable. When I said in theory, my phone thought I said, "Hey Siri," and started talking. Oh, now I did say, "Hey Siri." Oh my God, look at this. Now my computer, Emma, stop that. Oh my goodness. Okay. So, okay. So infinite scalability is the objective for sure. So it's just, what are the membranes? Membranes exist in nature. Membranes exist throughout. So the membranes that I've identified that need to be drawn are the membranes around the stewardship of assets. Like, it only takes so many people to steward a particular asset, right? It only takes so many people to perform a set of assets to perform a function for society, right? And so if you show interest and expertise and attunement towards a particular asset, stewardship of a particular asset on behalf, you should steward that asset. You should have a path towards stewardship of that asset that is agreed upon by the community and that is organic and flexible. And as we see structures form, we see groups form. The pyramidal hierarchical structures are okay. They exist some places in nature, but they just form and dissolve. Form and dissolve is necessary, right? We don't, these permanent like hierarchical pyramids just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they don't exist in nature. Those patterns don't exist. You don't see them very much. So the way it starts is definitely at the time to start embodying vulnerable transparency and game B type operational behavior and cultural norms is when you're at 2-3 people. If it's instantiation of an idea, that's the time to start. If you scale yourself up to Dunbar's number to realize it's unmanageable, and now we need to implement vulnerable transparency and game B cultural norms, it's going to be tough. At least it's going to be a lot harder. I mean, this is the problem we have now. So as projects start that have the capacity to start with a small team and scale to millions of people, or at least, having interactional flow with millions of people in some kind of transactional exchange. These are anybody who's got that kind of concept. Getting vulnerable transparency and game B cultural norms embedded in your organization from the get-go is this critical decision to make now. And myself and a team of people called the Protocol.love Facilitators Guild is here to support any organization who wants to do that as early as possible. So immediately, like you may be just hanging out with some friends and having some conversations. As soon as you see those conversations starting to get serious, like, wow, maybe we should actually do something here. That's the moment to start thinking about Protocol.love. Okay, and as you move from, wow, maybe we should do something here, into, wow, we're doing something here, guys, look at this. So you move from interaction around the idea to actual transaction with each other, right? And you've formed a formal, like, collective business and you're doing operations of some kind. That's the time you want to be truly exploring what Protocol.love has to offer in terms of how you create the framework for your scaling, essentially. And we're getting more and more of the details of that all written down. A lot of it's in the writings I have inherently and subtly. On Protocol.love is actually the URL. You can go to the Protocol.love on your browser and you find lots of this information about how exactly to do that. And you'll also find the information about how to get in contact with us if you'd like one of our facilitators guilds to actually come on with your team and help you do this. And nothing is more important right now. So we are glad to offer that as a gift to startups right now.
Awesome. What a beautiful, generous gift that you are providing the world.
Yeah, I hope it is perceived as such, and we can gift it many, many times.
Yeah. Well, I'm at that stage with a couple different, I feel like, groups of people where it feels very beautiful timing, that like it's just at the super inception stage, beginnings of creating the values, the morals, the ethics, the protocols that that would be really fun to play with you and Protocol.love and the team to explore this process. So I look forward to playing and exploring.
Awesome. And then just, where this all leads, of course, is the Protocol.love browser. So everybody operating in vulnerable transparency using this digital protocol will then be able to see everything everybody else is doing just at a click of a mouse. You can explore the whole ecosystem of connections and flow, and click on an organization and click on the people and click on the decisions and click on the ledgers of the economic transaction, currency flows. All of that is going to be completely transparent. The level of holopticism, the level of ability to see the whole for every individual will be so infinitely enhanced that we cannot help but be more collectively intelligent together. And that's my hope for where all this will head.
So a question that came to my mind, and I actually remember asking this to Reiki, of right now, I mean, I love that love is in it. Protocol.love. Like, I mean, really tuning into like our highest technologies, our hearts, our energetic field, our aura, like being able to telepathically communicate. Like, I mean, I think that is, these are the tools that I think, ancient awareness practices of yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, martial arts, I mean, help us cultivate these abilities or skills. But right now we are dependent on, well, I would not say dependent. We're utilizing satellites to, I mean, you and I are zooming across the interwebs wirelessly from California to Arizona, and that's, utilizing satellites and all kinds of different technology systems. And one of my questions is, who owns a lot of those satellites? Like, I'm thinking probably governments and large corporations. And so when YouTube decides to censor or take down a video, that's, I mean, they're just their organism. They've created a membrane around YouTube and its data, and they can decide to take down that video. But still, I guess my curiosity with like Holochain or these more decentralized systems, I mean, are they still utilizing satellites or this wireless technology? How's the information flowing? So that's one question.
Okay.
And then another one would be the what's the word to use? Holopticism, decentralization, like nothing can be stopped. Part of me loves the decentralized components of like information. Fully distributed. And then for one side of just, I guess responsibility or awareness to that flow. What if some really either harmful, violent, deceitful information or something of like how to create a bomb or this or that, like gets in that and it can be sent to everybody and there's no way to like stop that. So two different questions there. Like, what if there is some information that really like the majority of the planet is like, this should not probably be spread, throughout everything. And then the other part is like, still what's managing the information flow between satellites and like how the Holochain would operate.
Yeah. Well, I think the easier question to answer is the second. And Junto's already done this. Junto is the social network platform built on Holochain that will replace Facebook through their network called Metasocial. So Metasocial is the standard protocol that all the social network projects can all come together and create a coalition and all share data and all share our social graph across all of them. So you don't have to ever rebuild your social network ever again once you leave Facebook, right? Junto's doing all that. They've already, have the system in place. So your filters are there. There's going to be people responsible for doing content filtering and by certain criteria, and you can turn on any kind of filter you want at any time. That's how information. That's how we can do that as a site. It's fully fully agent-centric filtering of information. So the
Well,
information you don't want, you get the right to block. But you don't need to, we don't need a central authority that decides what we should block and what not. We'll decide that for ourselves. Thank you.
Well, yeah. So who decides? Like, so in Junto, so like let's say, for one, I have another question.
Look, Josh, I'm a completely third-party standalone filtering organization. It is my job to provide filtering if you have children in your house, for instance. It is we are going to create the content filter for you. We're going to work on the algorithms to be able to identify content and whatnot. And the second you don't like the way we're filtering, guess what? You can go to another filtering company group and use their filtering, right?
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, it well, kind of, but I guess like what I mean, and this was just a total hypothetical scenario, but I mean, I guess it could be reality. I mean, what if somebody put information out there of like how to create, a nuclear weapon, atomic weapon, something that, I mean, could cause massive devastation. Here's how to do it at home with like Home Depot materials. Hopefully that's not possible, but who knows?
It is possible, and it's already out there. You
Yeah.
know? That's the reality. It's, if you want to find out how to build a nuclear bomb, you can.
That's kind of concerning.
Like isn't it interesting how much we actually do love each other and love life, but nobody's done it?
Yeah.
I mean, but to even take it to a much simpler task, like just building a pipe bomb. I mean, how easy is it to build a pipe bomb and go leave it in a public park somewhere? Like we really are, actually, when you get down to it, actually as individuals, we're pretty nice to each other, right? What we see is that when we get into these big centralized groups, we don't end up acting the same. Then we have
I wouldn't go as, I think for the most part, we're a society and a species that wants to work together. I think you look at nature, natural patterns, I think much of nature wants to work together. Then also there's parts of nature that are super fierce, and I mean animals killing each other here and there, I mean all the time. So I mean there's a violence to nature as well.
Right. Well, what humans have done is we've been able to scale our fierceness to exponential levels.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So one person can be just feeling particularly fierce one day and press a red button and destroy most of the life on the planet.
Yeah.
That's not a fierce expression is real, though, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess starting to be really discerning on how I've been programmed, how we've been programmed to this thought of like, an extremist terrorist group, which I would not in this moment say like that I feel like every human being like that there's no people on this planet that are going to want to cause harm to others. Like I would love to believe that, but I mean, I do feel that there are some beings that's not the truth, and so, or that's not the way that they're choosing to live. And so, sure. I don't know whether I want to go as far as to like say like that programming of like these terrorist groups which our governments might have created on the news. I don't know the truth behind all that. Right. Very discerning of like
what go down those rabbit
holes, but there is the possibility that, I mean, it seems like, I mean, whether it was, Nazis.
Josh, I don't know if this answers where you're going, and if it doesn't, forgive me.
Yeah.
But I think what you notice is the bad behavior really happens at the scale levels, at higher up in the pyramid. That's where the really horrible behavior is happening. And I was saying earlier that Game A tends to, if you're going to rise in power and influence in the world, it is by being more sociopathic.
Yeah.
It's being less empathetic for your fellow man and your fellow life gives you the ability to rise into powerful positions. And that's where you see the horrible things happening, that you actually don't see it. Like in the perfect example we just had, you don't actually see it much in actual communities of people just hating each other so much that they're going to kill a bunch of each other.
Yeah.
Like, it really doesn't happen that much. And I know that media, this is another rabbit hole. Of course, I don't want to create any controversy, certainly. But of course, we do have a media delivery system that when it does happen, especially with things like guns, that it does become a major worldwide phenomenon that gets blown out of proportion, in my opinion. But in reality, that kind of violent outburst is so rare in community, but it's constant and regular at the echelons of power, where we're constantly having the troops killing each other over various resources battles. And that's where the really, really bad behavior comes from. I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, it's such complex. I mean, I think that what we deem bad behavior, and I I really enjoy playing with ways of being of non-duality, like not good or bad, the yin and the yang of like all
Right.
is. And this like I have, I really honor the practice of yoga meditation. So a lot of like my different kind of yoga studies and teachings like explore those realms of non-duality
Right.
and acting from just an awareness space of observer and not reacting to anything, responding to what is present. Uh, but I guess so I don't necessarily get into good or evil of like the evil inside of me or you or another person or the devil or the dark, but like that whatever is bringing forth like somebody's thoughts to like cause harm to somebody else, like that, I mean, I feel like it starts just at an individual level, like just as a single being. And then I think it becomes more worrisome when, like a group of those come together. And I think, I mean, some people like might just take the gun and go out and like, do the mass shooting. That's horrible. Absolutely. And it's not quite as concerning to me as like if 10 or 20 or 40 or 50 or 100 of those people decide to like, organize something together.
Right.
And so, I mean, I guess I still see the reason for like, I mean, why we, I mean, I can see like two parts of my personality here, like playing, I'm a Libra.
But wait, I think you're stumbling onto it though, because any group doing that is going to be limited by Dunbar's number, right?
Yeah. Hopefully, unless we've created technology that enables them to scale infinitely.
Well, if the vulnerable transparency is there inherent in the technology, which is how I'm suggesting it go,
Yeah.
we would be able to identify the rebellious behavior when they were at 2 people or 10 people. Or
so we would be able to see it because it is a transparent system. So hopefully,
right. Evil
going to be
those evil exists.
Yeah.
Yeah, bad behavior exists. Rivalrous behavior will happen. People will do bad things. We're all human. It's part of the experience. And if they weren't doing it, we wouldn't be able to, of course, appreciate the love and the goodness. So it's being able to just be vulnerable. Transparency allows us to see these patterns play themselves out, and hopefully give us ways to step into a higher conscious conversation about what's happening. So you guys want to blow something up because you're mad about this thing. Let's see where the root of that thing is. Let's have a deeper conversation about the root of that thing. Oh, there is something. This entity over here in the system is actually creating a pattern that's not working for you. I don't even know if they know that. Let's make sure they know that. Hey, you realize that you're doing this and they almost wanted to blow you up. But it's a win if you're not doing that anymore. It's a win, right? Like that's the level of conversation we can be having if we have access to a shared reality, which is a consensus reality, right, of all the individual agents.
Well, and I guess that the transparency of like how I'm understanding holochain or junto or metasocial is like that that level of transparency, that it's decentralized, but then also everybody is going to be able to see you if like I feel like there are people with those archetypes that are like the watchdogs. Like there's the organization called Watchdogs, and that they're like really watching over things, like, so if you want to get together with 10 people and talk about how angry you are at this group, like there's going to be some people being like, hey, you guys are getting like a little bit interesting in your what you're planning and communications. Maybe it's time to bring some other people in the community into to address the situation.
Protocol.love does that through what I call impact currency, which is a currency category that any collective, any individual can create when they identify an impact that somebody or an organization is having. So you can apply an impact currency to them, positive or negative, by something that you value that they're having an impact on, and identify a metric around that. Now, if you're the only one that ever thinks that, it doesn't mean much in the world. But if this particular metric begins to spread and people recognize that metric too and agree it's an important metric to bring awareness to, the awareness of that is going to become far more prevalent in the ecosystem. And through that, we can, again, have as much access to vulnerable, transparent data about the behavioral patterns we're seeing in other organizations and the impact those organizations are having, and how does the impact affect the behavior, and how does the behavior affect the impact. We'll be able to see all these patterns.
Yeah.
Whole new level. I mean, it's a good place that I probably need to end it, because we have just been having a great time.
Yeah, I know.
We've gone almost 2 hours. I realized I kind of did have another appointment here.
I know, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at the time too. Do you have a couple more minutes?
Let's say literally a couple. Like two.
Okay.
Yeah.
One, the satellites. Like, how do we deal with I mean, if currently
Holochain and Protocol.love can work on any environment where we can get a digital signal between two nodes. So we can use the existing internet. We can use any other type of network that can get packets back and forth, basically, right, and have a layer of translation to ultimately. So different protocol layers right now is always TCP/IP. I think we're reliant on TCP/IP. So any physical network connection that can run a TCP/IP stack, Holochain can run on. There can be other network layers built too, and in fact, we are partnering. Holochain has partnered with other projects on some other communications layer stuff as well. So it can run on independent networks. It's actually the most it's regenerative, it's sustainable. What's the word? It's most resilient communications protocol for any kind of network outage or downage. So if anything does happen on the planet where the lines under the oceans, the internet lines under the oceans are getting broken or anything like that, or we're seeing any kind of instability to network communications, Holochain is the only thing that will make it through that. I hate to inform all the Nakamoto Consensus people that Nakamoto Consensus is going to have a major breakdown if there are major net splits. Gotcha.
Last quick little one, Junto, Metasocial, like when can we migrate off of Facebook and these new platforms? Like is it like next week, next month? Like, is it ready? Like when, what's the timeline of some of that stuff?
Holochain is launching imminently. They had a beta release ready to go. So we could add, at which time we would have had a Junto beta, a Metasocial beta, a Protocol.love beta as well. The decision was made to do some more rewrites just to have some cleaner, better code to offer the world before we give it, and then probably create a little more efficiency too. And it's causing some final delays, so that has been something we've been dealing with. But dates are not a thing you're going to get out of me or anybody from the Holochain team.
Gotcha.
But soon, it's all getting really on the final stages.
I mean, likely in this year, like hopefully.
Oh yeah, I would definitely say this year. However, if you asked me this last year, this time I would have said, "Oh yeah, this year for sure." So,
yeah.
No, but yeah, the answer is absolutely this year. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, so the last call to action, just anybody who's interested to play this game, contact Raymond and his crew through Protocol.love, and I definitely look forward to exploring it in any of the projects that I've got coming up. So thank you so much for your time, brother. Appreciate you.
Yeah, man, and that's the URL, Protocol.love.
Awesome, brother. Blessings.
Man, talk soon.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Local Earth Discussion Series. If you enjoyed the information in this discussion, please share it with your friends, family, and colleagues all around the world. As mentioned earlier, we are a nonprofit organization that operates primarily on contributions from our Patreon members and donations. Please consider becoming a Local Earth Patreon member. Membership begins as low as $1 per month. This has been brought to you in partnership with the Solar Energy Alliance. There is a link in the description below for a free solar proposal for your home and information about how to become a partner or ambassador with the Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Please check out our YouTube channel or Facebook page for other discussions in the series. Wishing you a beautiful day. Aloha.